Hello, this is Andrew with Missing Remote. Today we're going to take a look at the Sofabaton X1S. This is a universal remote control. Sofabaton sent me the X1S to review. As should become clear as we get further in, this is an objective review of the device. There will be a coupon code shared in the description. If you decide to use it, the channel will get a small kickback. I think it's important to disclose both of those things and to say thanks to Sofabaton for providing the opportunity to review the X1S. Before we get into the X1S, we're going to take a brief detour to talk about what makes a good universal remote. Because if we define the use cases, it's easier to figure out what boxes get checked and which don't. If you would prefer to skip this part, I'm going to put chapter links in the description, but you might lose a little bit of context. This is an area of deep personal interest for me. I actually built a fully functional prototype of what I consider to be the perfect universal remote back in 2011. I wasn't able to find the Texas Instrument RF4CE remote that I used in the prototypes. It's probably in the attic somewhere, but I still have two of the hub prototypes laying around in my office. I never ended up quitting my job and pursuing the project, but I was really close. I bring this up because this isn't a new thing for me. It's something that I've spent hundreds or maybe thousands of hours on, designing, building, testing, and getting to a working solution. Let's get started by listing some basic requirements. I got to start with the control formats: IR, IP, RS-232, Bluetooth, and HDMI CEC. Fun fact, this was the difference between the Raspberry Pi and the BeagleBone Black. The Raspberry Pi prototype could do HDMI CEC via Pulse 8's libCEC. Some of these are more important than others. IR and Bluetooth are completely required. IP should be there and is almost free to include, so why not? RS-232 is nice to have. You really only see that on high-end stuff, so maybe more driven by the target market demographic. CEC is gravy. It's great for monitoring state. The next thing is that there should be no line of sight requirement for the remote, which means the remote doesn't need to be pointed at any of the devices to control them. We also want to have support for remote IR blasters. This allows us to have the TV and other AV devices located in different places or potentially hide the hub. Support for a huge number of devices. The ability to create configurable scenario-based macros for specific uses. If you're familiar with Logitech's Harmony family of remotes, these are called activities. Sofabaton uses the same verbiage. These are things like watch live TV, listen to music, play video games, etc. They set up the devices into bundles and then control the input state for a specific use. A good remote needs to have the ability to track device state and recover when the expected state doesn't match the actual state. This is very common for IR devices. Sometimes the off command will just go missing and something doesn't turn off. This is where discrete commands for power and input are fantastic. The better remote controls will have these discrete commands in their control databases. Sofabaton does. For devices that have these capabilities, ideally, the remote has the ability to trigger these multiple times to reset back to a known state. We also need to have the ability to disconnect the configuration, which can be very complicated, from the day-to-day use. The way that we generally do this now is with a mobile app. We want to silo the hard parts from the easy parts for a lot of reasons. My kids don't need to know what devices we have, what inputs are what, and all the intricacies that surround that. I don't want to expose that to them. I want them to press a button on the remote and just have it work. We also need to have support for deep customization of startup and shutdown macros for the activities in order to manage state during these routines. The last hard requirement is support for home automation, mostly around lighting control. And then as a bonus, user extensibility is very nice. Thinking about these requirements, and there are more that I didn't list, it becomes obvious why we see the remote plus hub design as often as we do. As far as I know, Logitech was the first to market with this design. It allows the delegation of tasks. You have a remote in your hand that talks to the hub using RF or radio frequencies, so no line of sight is required. And the hub can talk IR, IP, Bluetooth, etc. to the devices that we want to control. This is the design that the X1S uses. So with the groundwork out of the way, let's focus on the X1S and start with the hardware. In the box, we get the remote, a hub, a USB charging cable, a USB power brick, and a couple of external IR blasters. You only need to use the IR blasters if you're having problems with the hub's built-in IR blasting. I like that it comes with two sets of blasters. One is a single head, the other has two heads. It allows us to have the flexibility to physically separate the components in the AV stack if you want, within reason of course, or potentially hide the hub behind the TV or wherever and only show the blasters to the world. I didn't opt to do that. I think that the hub looks like it belongs in the AV stack, but I love that Sofabaton has clearly thought through the use case, not only providing different blaster options for the device, but also placing mounting slots on the underside of the hub. The remote hardware is just about perfect. It is a soft touch plastic. There's a clear and bright display that shows devices, activities, custom buttons and macros. It lights up when you pick it up, so it's perfect for using in a dark room. There are enough buttons to do the things I do regularly with a remote. If you watch a lot of linear television and navigate by channel numbers, then it might be an issue, but you could in theory add the numbers as buttons on the display, but that would be a little kludgy. I haven't consumed linear television in ages, but when I did, I used the EPG, so maybe it's not even a problem. And the last thing worth pointing out is that there's a built-in battery and it uses USB-C for charging. I think that Sofabaton nailed the hardware. It feels tactically like money well spent. The software side of things is a little bit rougher. Fortunately, software is fixable. Setting everything up is straightforward, assuming you know what devices you have, what inputs they're connected to, and all of that. I spent maybe 15 minutes on the first pass. Sofabaton follows the same familiar devices and activities workflow as competitive solutions. If you're comfortable with that, then this will be very easy. It has all of the basics for media device control. The IR library is huge. There are discrete commands in the database. It supports Bluetooth for many devices, including the NVIDIA Shield and Apple TV, which I tested with it. It is worth noting that the Sofabaton's Bluetooth control is better than any other Bluetooth remote that I have ever tried. On the other hand, IP control is very limited. You get Roku. And Sofabaton claims support for Philips Hue, but in my experience, the Hue support is not functional. I don't have a physical Hue hub, so that might be a factor. But I use an emulator here to control lighting in the media room with my Logitech Harmony. It works no problem. I wasn't able to get the X1S to recognize that emulator, but it will detect and use the Home Assistant Hue emulator as a device. But it presents the Hue as a media device and not as a series of controllable lights. I wasn't able to figure out how to actually control any of the lights exposed through the interface with the X1S. That was disappointing. Broader support for more home automation platforms would be ideal, but Hue is a de facto standard of sorts, so that's a good start, but it needs to work in a way that makes sense. Hue exposes the devices in a structured way. It should be easy to iterate through that structure and expose each light as a stateful device. I passed this feedback onto the team at Sofabaton. Hopefully they do something with it. I can't imagine that it's a complicated thing to correct, but I also don't know enough about the underlying design of their stack to really say. Another gap on the software side of things is around state recovery. When things work the way they should, the X1S is brilliant at controlling the devices in my AV stack. Better than my Harmony even. But there are gaps when the IR commands go missing. As a control option, IR is suboptimal. There is no other way to say that. It's just not 100% reliable. There will be scenarios where the on-off input commands get lost in the room. It would be ideal if the hub respected that IR isn't 100% and allowed us to recover state without having to scorch the earth. Obviously, that's difficult when there aren't discrete on-off input commands, but where there are discrete IR commands, it should allow activities to be re-triggered and reissue all the discrete commands to reset state. Or, when the off button is pressed multiple times, there is a discrete off button. It should just send all the discrete power off commands for the devices where power state is managed by the X1S. It doesn't do that right now. If the user is pressing a button multiple times, there's a reason. They're trying to get the actual state to reflect the state that the hub expects. This is an area where some improvement should also be easy and cut down on end user frustration. Fortunately, that disconnect in state doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. This should also be an easy problem to fix. In the requirements list, I mentioned the importance of being able to tweak the startup shutdown macros. The X1S supports a rich control of those macros. I use these to improve the consistency in my experience. Let's walk through a couple of examples. Here is my startup macro for the Apple TV. After turning everything on and setting the input on the AVR, it issues a couple commands with some delays to ensure a consistent state and to make sure that the Bluetooth keyboard, how the X1S controls the Apple TV, is connected. Both are convenience things. I was finding that the first press I made after turning on the Apple TV was triggering the keyboard to connect, and the actual command was getting ignored. This smooths that out. And here is my startup macro for the Shield. It's fairly similar, making sure that it's on and the homepage is set for a consistent user experience. You have a lot of flexibility here to do press and hold, issue commands, basically anything you want to do. Sofabaton nailed the startup shutdown macro aspect as well, but there are some gaps. I already mentioned the miss on home automation. There are some others where it can and arguably should improve. The most critical area for improvement is around the external API. This allows you to run activity on-off macros from anything that can call a URL. There's no authentication mechanism there. It is not safe to use this. The external API commands are available via the internet with no security, and there is no way to invalidate a URL once it gets out. Do not enable this feature. Some others would include a more extensive IP control database. This would help with state management. For those of us with higher end components, IP control is the best way to integrate devices. Everything is discrete, it's easy to query state. It would be nice if this was an option. It should also support traffic across networks. I use VLANs to segment user and device traffic on my network. The X1S is a media device, so it is not on the network that people are on. To use the app, I need to connect my phone to the device network. It's a minor inconvenience, but I don't understand why the app can't remember devices and connect to them directly across networks once it's set up. I'm not blocking this traffic, it should work, but it doesn't. Better extensibility would also be nice. I suggested to Sofabaton that user-supported plugins would be great. This is a popular model on many platforms. This would be an easy way for interested parties to add support for things that Sofabaton doesn't have the resources to do, like IP control for devices. I would be more than happy to do this for my Denon AVR. Another is API callouts from the hub as buttons, macros, etc. This would be the easiest way to support home automation. I configure a local URL that turns a light on or off, or if you want to get fancy, sets a color temperature or hue in a room, and make that a button that I can trigger manually or as part of an activity startup shutdown routine. None of these things seem like insurmountable challenges for the team. All of them would make it a better product. Wrapping up, I don't want anyone to come away from this thinking negative thoughts about the X1S. If some of this seems overly critical, it's probably because this is a topic of deep personal interest for me. Overall, I really like the Sofabaton X1S. It generally works very well. It is a very good remote in most scenarios. If you just want a remote that controls the devices in your AV stack, it does that, usually very well, and the hardware is just about perfect. It does have some rough edges though, but there's so much potential here, which is why I spent the time really digging in. The X1S is good, but it needs some software polish to be great, most urgently around recovering state. It's a good thing that they nailed the hardware, and with some time and effort, they could totally nail the software as well. I hope you found that useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I will get to them as soon as I can. Thanks.